Buddy. All right, welcome everybody. We're gonna wait here a couple minutes as I see some attendees filtering in. This is fantastic. We got a really good response from folks. And I'm so happy to see folks here. We'll let this counter go up a little bit more and then we will get started. All right, I kind of see the counter asymptoting here, so we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. My name's Jacqueline O'Connor. Hey, Ping and Joe, would you mind muting? Sorry. Perfect. All right. Welcome everyone. My name is Jacqueline O'Connor. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at Penn State. But for today, I am the chair of AIAA Publications. So we're the committee that deals with publications within the AIAA, and I'll introduce a little bit more about us in a second. I really appreciate everybody coming to this webinar. We have 4 things that we're going to do today. The first is I'm just going to give a brief introduction to AIAA Publications so you know a little bit more about our committee and the publications that are published by AIAA. We'll also talk about best practices for reviewers, and that'll just be a high-level presentation from me. But then the real exciting part of the event today is our editor panel. So we have 2 editors-in-chief and an associate editor who have joined us to talk about what they see as quality reviewing. And then finally, we'll have a question and answer period. So the question and answer period, this is where we really want some input from you folks. If you have questions, as we're going through the presentation, I'd really encourage you to put them in the Q&A box. So not in the chat, in the Q&A box. I'm going to keep an eye on those, and then we'll go through and answer all of those at the end. But sometimes, you know, a really good question comes up, you really just want to jot it down, please use that Q&A box. And I'll be keeping track of those, and I'll be the one sort of running the question time at the end. Okay, fantastic. So here we go. Quick introduction to AIAA Publications. So today, the focus is really on reviewing for journals, and we have 8 absolutely fantastic journals within the AIAA family. You can see all of them here. They range across all different types of aerospace engineering, and all the way from very fundamental work, as would be published in the AIAA journal, to more applied, which is, you know, and the application areas are covered in each of the other 7 journals. So all of the topics that we're going to talk about today apply to each of these journals. There's nothing particularly special about reviewing for one journal versus the other, but I think the basics of good reviewing apply to all 8. The types of papers that we publish in the journals are varied. So you can see this top list. Most public papers that get published are research papers. So you do a study, you get results, or you run a simulation, you get results. You've learned something new, you interpret your results, you talk about your uncertainty quantification, you know, all the good things you do in good science. You write a paper about that, and that's a research paper. Sometimes, though, we publish reviews or survey papers. In a couple journals, they have published histories, and those are very interesting as well. And then smaller things, technical notes and corrections are also published. 2 journals have specific types of articles: express articles, which is by invite only for AIAA journal, and then design articles for the Journal of Aircraft. But you can read a lot more about the journal scopes and contents at the link below. If you just search for AIAA journals, you'll be able to see all the information on that. So obviously, there are the folks who edit the journals, and those are the 8 folks that you see on the bottom there. But there's also a bunch of us working behind the scenes on the AIAA Publications Committee, and that's the top row of people. And those are the folks that are supporting the journals and the book series. So I also put our 3 editors-in-chief of the book series. to try and make the publications the AIAA puts out as high quality as possible. And so many thanks to all of them for all of their input. But like I said, we're focusing on journals today, and you can see each of the editors-in-chief for the journals, the 8 journals that AIAA covers. Okay. So just a couple other notes before we move on. The AIAA Publications Committee does a number of different things. We review the journals to help the EICs keep, improving and help support initiatives that they have for their own journals. We have subcommittees that help the book EICs and the journal EICs. We have an awards committee, and so we give out 2 publication awards per year. And if anybody has nominations for those, we're always excited to get those nominations. And then very importantly, we have a publication ethical standards subcommittee, and they're the folks who set ethical standards for publication for the Institute and adjudicate violations of ethical standards in publications. And so that's a very important part of the committee as well. Okay, cool. So that's just a little bit of a background as to who we are and what we do. I know sometimes not all the workings of a professional society are particularly clear, so I wanted to give folks a little bit of background on what Publications does before we jump into best practices for reviewers. All right, so best practices for reviewers, I'm going to go through this quickly. Although if folks have questions, I do encourage them to put them in the Q&A box, just because I do want to get to our editors, because they're the ones with the real expertise here. So this is just a quick timeline of how publications are generally handled within a journal. So like I said, you do some really cool research, you write a paper, and it gets submitted to the journal, and you choose the journal based on the journal scope, which I mentioned before are outlined on the AIAA website. That paper first goes to an editor-in-chief, and they check the paper. They make sure what's within the scope of the journal. They do kind of a basic quality check. Although the EICs can't be experts in everything necessarily, they have a good feel for what a good paper looks like. If that paper is not within scope, they'll often refer it to a different journal, right? So, but hopefully you found the journal that makes sense for your work. So then what they do is they assign it to an associate editor. So under each EIC, there's a small army of associate editors who are the people who then do a more detailed check of the paper and assign reviewers. So in this presentation, we're really focusing on the process of reviewing. So the reviewers review the paper and provide feedback. And in a second, we're going to talk about what that process looks like. They enter all their feedback into a form and they send it back to the associate editor. The associate editor then checks the review and makes a decision. And so there are 2 sort of paths. Usually on the first go around, the decision is to revise, right? So the reviewers have done a nice job. They've made a number of suggestions and said, well, these are things that need to be looked at or fixed. And then the paper gets sent back to the author and you go through the process again. If once it goes through, if the paper eventually is good enough, then it gets accepted. And, if the paper isn't good enough at any one of these junctures, either by the EIC, the AE, or after the reviews, either the EIC or the associate editor can reject the paper or withdraw it, depending on how it looks. So that's the general flow of information. And like I said, we're really going to focus in on this 4th box, which is reviewers reviewing papers. Okay, so what's the goal of review? The first is to ensure that only papers of the highest quality are published in AIAA journals. We want our journals to be a really trusted source of scientific and engineering information, and we really rely on our reviewers to be able to do that. So this service to our community is not just service to the journal, but I think it's service to the entire discipline. The second thing is to provide authors constructive feedback, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. If any of you have written papers before, sometimes you get caught in a loop and you just need somebody else to look at your paper. And this is what reviewers are for. And so the idea is not to just criticize the paper, it is to provide feedback so that the paper can become better. And finally, I think this last one is important, which is to create a scientific community, right? Peer review is the foundation, I think, of good scientific and engineering inquiry. It's the quality control for our entire discipline. And so as a reviewer, you play an extremely important role in ensuring that that community is doing the best work that it can, and that people who come to the community can learn, and within the community, we're learning from each other. So I do think that third piece is quite important. Finally, just a quick reminder for those who are very new to the review process, this is confidential. So once you are asked to review a paper, you are not to discuss or share the manuscript during the review process or afterwards, right? So a author submits their paper, their name is on the paper, so it's not a double-blind process, but it's a single-blind process. That author's not going to know who did the review, but we also assume that the peer reviewers are not going to share the paper while it's under review. There's a big watermark on each of the papers as they go through review to remind you of that, but then not to reveal your role as a reviewer, right? This is part of the confidence of the process. Okay, so things that make a good review, so or make you the right reviewer for the review. Things that are good to have, obviously expertise in the topic area of the paper. It doesn't mean that you have to be the world's foremost expert in this topic. You just have to have, good familiarity with it. If we were all doing the exact same thing, then I don't know what the point of engineering research would be. But you do have to have some background knowledge in the area. And also familiarity with the methods. This happens to me a lot in my own reviewing. I use a number of diagnostics that are pretty common. And so somebody may use the diagnostic for something a little bit different that I've not done before, but my familiarity with the method that's used makes me a good reviewer for the paper, right? And so those are things that are good to have. Things that you should be watching out for. Family connections, I said actual or academic. Obviously, don't review your brother's paper, but you should also not be reviewing your advisor's papers or your former students' papers, right? So that's your academic family, as well as your actual family. If you're directly collaborating with somebody or in direct competition, that's probably not great. Right, that's a conflict of interest that would be good to avoid. And then finally, someone from your current or recently former institution, right? So if you just moved from, I don't know, MIT to Caltech, you would not review a paper from your old department at MIT. If you had just been there within the past couple of years, that would be considered a conflict of interest, and you wouldn't review a paper from somebody in your department at Caltech. Or from an institution with whom you have a significant financial interest. So, if you have money invested in a startup or something, right, that would be a significant financial interest. The reason I go through this is because the associate editors don't necessarily know about your conflicts of interest, right? They may know who your PhD advisor is or something like that, and typically they know what institution you're at currently. But they don't know who you're related to. And so it is on you to be aware of conflicts of interest. And the AE, won't be offended when you say, I really shouldn't. This person was recently in my department. And so I don't think I should be reviewing their paper. That's good. That's a good, ethical thing to bring up and something to catch before the review process gets too far. Okay, so what does an actual review look like? So now, we know why review is important. We know what the minimum requirements are to become a reviewer. And so now you're reviewing a paper. What should that review actually say? And so I tend to think of this as sort of a funnel. It's good to summarize the paper at the top of a review. This is good on for two reasons. One, I think it helps set up the rest of the discussion, especially if you're going to talk about details of certain sections. It's good to have a summary at the top. But second, it gives both the associate editor and the authors the confidence that you read the paper closely, which is, important. And also identify whether you think it's a good fit for the paper or for the journal. This is actually quite important, and we can talk about this more in Q&A. But where you submit your paper, depending on what it's on, may or may not be obvious. And so the reviewer can say, well, maybe this is a little bit too applied for this journal, or well, maybe it's a little bit too fundamental. So that fit piece is important. You want to identify what the main contribution is, so what's the point? And then usually, and I do this in reviews, and I appreciate when people do this in reviews for me, just what are the high level themes of the review? Like I recommend this paper for acceptance with revisions. These are the three main things the author should think about, and then go into a bunch of detailed comments. So this figure wasn't clear. This figure needs better uncertainty bars. I can't see them. This discussion didn't make sense. Check your signs here. Whatever it is, those details comments come at the end. And really, those are quite important because that's what the authors are going to be stepping through and responding to once they get the review. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these. You can feel free to screenshot this, and we're going to have a lot more of discussion around this when I turn it over to our editors. But these are just some questions that you may want to ask yourself as you're reviewing a paper. And it really works through the entire paper, all the way from the motivation to the literature review. Is the aim of the work clear? Did they use the right methods? Do they have the right uncertainty quantification? Are they walking you through the discussion? Is everything clear? Do the figures make sense? And are the conclusions outlined well, right? The other thing is a lot of folks include supplementary material or data. That is part of the publication and should also be reviewed. Often people will put really important stuff in the supplementary material that just doesn't, is too lengthy to go in the main paper, or they're, as I've done in the past, they're publishing their data, right? And so that's super helpful. That's a really great contribution to the field. You want to make sure that that's clear, that it looks correct, and all of that. So reviewing the supplementary material is definitely part of the review. Okay, so now you've identified the things that you feel need improvement in the paper. How do you write it? And if anybody's gotten reviews, you put a lot of work into writing a paper, and you understand that you're going to get feedback in the peer review process, but there's a balance that you want somebody to strike when writing about it, right? So strike this balance carefully. You don't want to be too mean. I'm going to give you an example on the next slide. I have certainly gotten some very snarky review comments. That's not helpful. That doesn't put people in the right frame of mind. But then at the same time, if people are too timid and maybe kind of making a suggestion that the author may sort of want to think about this, like, no, you're an expert, right? You have expertise that could be really important. And so, not being too timid and identifying substantial action items that the author should take is actually very helpful. You're not being mean by asking them to do things. That's the point of the review. So, on your first few reviews, sometimes it's good to get some feedback, right? If you're not sure how to say something. And so, again, without breaking the confidence of the review process, hey, if asking a peer or a mentor, if you got a review comment like this, how would you feel? That would be good. The most helpful reviews are the ones that identify what needs to be changed and why, right? It's not just, I don't like that figure. It's, you need to change the uncertainty bars on this figure because I can't see them for the last 8 points or something, right? Like, once the author knows the reason for the change, It really helps them improve that aspect of the paper, and B, feel like the comment is coming from a place of substantiation, not just a feeling. So this balance is important, and it's something that, you know, as you work through and become a more experienced reviewer, is a good thing. Okay, so this is actually a comment that I got on a paper once. And the discussion of the fit is lengthy and unnecessary. All right, that's cool. And you can read the rest of that there. We can usually do algebra. Thanks for the snark. And it's funny because in a previous publication, we had not put this information in. And so a reviewer said, could you explain a little bit more how you did that fit? It's like, well, okay. So sometimes you get contradictory advice, but the advice doesn't need to be snarky, right? So a way to turn that needlessly and unproductively critical review into something that's more, you know, professional, is a suggestion on the right? So I think the paragraphs explaining the Hilbert transform are not necessary and should be removed, which would also help in shortening the paper. This was a pretty long paper, so we did have to shorten it, right? So, you know, tone matters, especially, and I know some of the folks here today are probably graduate students or were graduate students pretty recently. Remember, it's a lot of the times it's young professionals, including grad students, who are writing these papers. You know, this may be their first rodeo. So productive comments are helpful. Okay, so again, these are just some best practices. This is the type of thing that you could screenshot. And I know AIAA is recording this as well. But just some thoughts about professionality, keeping the comments objective, and being clear, right? If you give a reason for the comment that for the change that you're asking for, the comment that you make, that usually helps the author and identify what the best path to correcting that is. And so this is quite important. So at the end, remember, you're the gatekeeper of quality. So do it professionally. Okay, so at this point, you've heard enough from me. And I should say I am also an associate editor at the AIAA journal, but that's not the hat I have on today. I am extremely happy to have 3 of our editorial folks here. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to move over to our first panelist. And if you have any questions, please keep putting those into the Q&A box. And I'm trying to remember who the first panelist was. Ping, was it you? I think it was you.
I think so.
Okay. All right. Then I will turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Hope you guys can see the slide that we just put up.
If you could please at the bottom click, there's a symbol right next to the percentage. Do you see that? Yes, click that and you'll be in presentation mode. Perfect.
All right, good. All right, thanks for everyone, and we as a part of the AIAA journals family, we really appreciate everyone's the support to our journal. My name is Ping Mu. I'm the editor-in-chief for one of the AIAA journals, is called Journal of Guidance Control and the Dynamics. So next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to share some quick thoughts on how to be a reviewer for AIAA journal. Jackie has touched upon quite a number of things, some of the very basic stuff, and I just want to to be a little bit more dive a little bit more deeper in specifics. From a journal editor's perspective, there are two key roles for a review. The first role of a reviewer is really to help the editor judge the merit of a paper that's submitted to the journal. On that respect, there are two fronts. One is the technical part. Is the paper technically sound? Does it have a novelty? Does it contain significant contribution that is beyond what we already know, the existing work in the literature? Then editorially, how does the presentation look like? Is that readable, understandable, easily comprehensible, and does it contain adequate review of current literature, and has it put the proper context of the work with respect to what has been done in the past? Is the numerical results accurate enough, and the figures readable, etc., etc. So these are the things that we like your input very much, and sometimes there are other things that are beyond these two aspects. Things like potential ethical violation. By that we mean, for instance, plagiarism, or some other issues that if you happen to notice that, we would very much appreciate that you alert the editor of any of these issues. And so that is one big piece of the role that we see a reviewer from a journal perspective. The other role, of course, is to help the author improve the paper wherever appropriate. For instance, it will be very useful that you make a very detailed, specific comments on key technical issues that you see, and if the paper needs some significant improvement, your input on constructive suggestions for where and how to improve the paper, both technically and editorially. These are very important input as a part of the packages we typically forward to the author. So these are that's the second half of the role that we critical roles of the reviewer that from a journal's perspective. I'd like to give you a couple of examples that these are actual true reviews that my journal has received, and the sort of exemplifies what I just mentioned. Review one. This review has 3 pages. You see by the way, there's no particular format for a reviewer. You typically how to write a review, but what I'm showing here is more or less a common practice. See, this review first essentially make a paragraph that summarize what is in this paper, what are the contributions, and so that's then the reviewer provides a general set of comments and suggestion what a revision improvement might be. Then the reviewer goes into detailed section by section. The literally go through every section, and then the review has some specific comments. Then that was spelled out very clearly, all the way you see up to the conclusion. So when the the author gets a reviewer gets a review like this, you have a very clear idea what the reviewers has pointed out and what are the requests and and the rationale behind that. That would be extremely something like this would be extremely helpful to both the editor as well as the author. This is one of our review. So this is really very a good one, but sometimes we have reviewers that even go beyond the level like this. This is a second review that the example that I want to show you. This particular review in of itself is practically a paper because the the reviewer actually even labeled the sections kind of like a paper. It has a top paragraph, what the viewer did, and then it has major correction or revision that the reviewer feels that the paper needs to do. Not only just a word, the review goes into very detailed equations to support the reviewer's point on what needs to be and what are the corrections that should be done. But that's not all. The reviewer actually coded his correction and run the simulation, and that's a figure to support his the reviewer's point. And you see, this is a very professional like looking review. It has a figure number, has a figure caption. Then, of course, the review goes on several other major detailed comments and other corrections and suggestions. This is happens to be the one that the reviewers has a very thought some major revision are needed. Okay, then this one happens to run 6 pages, and more equations and more details. Then the review ends up with the references. Did I say this is like a paper? It is a mini paper. So again, something like this is tremendously helpful to everyone, really. And obviously, now the review gives you a very clear idea of what the reviewer thinks needs to be correct, to be revised or to be correct, and it gives you as the author has a clear way to whether or not it's the author agrees or not. Here you are not in the confused state. Okay, so that's extremely helpful. I should mention that these are some kind of, like I said, exemplary reviewers. We're not asking you to write every review this way, but just want to show you that there are these sort of a review out there. Obviously, you don't want to go the other extreme. Sometimes we do receive a review that just one sentence says this is a good paper, should be published, or says there's nothing in this paper that's warrants publication. That's it. That is not very useful, really. Truth be told, it's very unhelpful. So you definitely don't want to go that way. Now, I have just 10 minutes, so I will quickly jump to another point that I want to make is that reviewing for journal paper is always a serious business, right? But sometimes some small gestures can really go a long way to make this whole business of a publishing paper a lot more rewarding, or in some other spectrum, it's less frustrating or punishing. A couple of suggestions that share your compliments with the author on their good work, and we will, we write paper, and the praises, compliments from our peer means really a lot to us. So as the author, when the author gets that's really very rewarding. So share your compliment. And sometimes the humor would work magic, even when you criticize a paper. Okay, here are some actual quotes. It's very much enjoyed the paper. Wish I had thought of this one. Well, this means quite a lot to the author. Second one says, well, this is a little long, but this is really looks like a mystery novel. I found this, I couldn't stop reading that. And, honestly, I think this is the best technical paper I have ever read, a bravo. I mean, something like this is really highly appreciated by the author because we write paper for our peers and our peers enjoy that. That's mission accomplished. And even when you criticize a paper, you don't have to be snarky, like Jackie just said. This is one criticism. Biggest problem with this manuscript, which has nearly sucked the will to live out of me, is the terrible writing style. Well, clearly the writing style of this paper has a lot to improve on, but when the author gets it, I think hopefully the point will be well taken. You get your point crossed and you point out the problem. So here are some of the things. Again, this is the whole thing. Reviewing for a journal is sort of like an experience that only gets better when you down it multiple times. But here are some quick pointer to get you started. I think that along these ways, we are looking forward to involving a lot of young folks like you that's really this is the future of our journals. So with that, hopefully we'll get you start on the right path. I think I want to stop here. My 10 minutes is up, and well, I'll let Jackie take over.
Awesome. Thanks, Ping.
All right.
All right, if you could stop sharing, then we will move over to Natasha.
Yeah.
And I think somebody's going to share Natasha's slides. There we go. Awesome. Thank you.
Natasha, would you please unmute?
We still can't hear you. I'm not sure what happened. All right. Nope. No, still can't hear you. All right, it looks like Natasha might need, Natasha might need to sign back in. So maybe let's update the order. Joe, would you mind going next?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Should I share screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, can people see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'm fighting a cold, so please accept my apologies if I do some coughing. Before I begin, a lot of stuff I'm start my video. What's going on here? Where's my, hang on. start my video. Okay, now I'm going to do the full screen. Okay. So a lot of the comments that Jackie and Ping have given are quite good. And I'm not going to try to, some of it is a little repeat, but I'll try to highlight some new things. And I got to try to hide this. Okay. Because I can't see them. I got to get out of this and I got to hide the people because they're in my screen. Okay. Now I go back to this. Okay. So I'm Joe Powers, University of Notre Dame, editor-in-chief of the Journal Propulsion Power. Very brief background. As a senior graduate student, I did my first AIAA review for the Journal Propulsion Power in 1988. My advisor was a associate editor. I did dozens of reviews for varieties of AIAA in the 1990s. That was recognized, and I think in developing your careers, I think it can be very useful to become associate editor. One of the best ways you do that is writing first high quality papers and high quality reviews. And people will see that. Very recently, I met a fellow who I'd seen through reviews for many years, and his reviews were outstanding. And I asked him to join as associate editor because I know that I can trust the quality of his reviews. And since 2016, I've been editor-in-chief of Journal Propulsion and Power. Some notes. A lot of these are overlap with things that have been said previously. High quality reviews are essential to the success of the journal and to our entire scholarly aerospace discipline. Now, aerospace is more than scholarship, but I would argue that scholarship has had a large role in many of our aerospace advances. There's a lot of discussion about how to do journal and speed and quality right now, and there's some competing journals that truly value speed, and authors very much like that. Sometimes they cut corners in the review process. Personally, I value the quality and depth of the review over speed. One thing you can do that is very important, and about half of our referees do not do it. This is extremely important. If you're asked to do a review, take 10 seconds out of your day and respond. We get people doing all kinds of things, and I'll be harsh language. We get people dawdling for months in responding. And if you don't respond, it does not help the associate editor. It's going to help the associate editor to respond, and it's going to help the authors. And if the answer is, I can't review it, just say it. You can't review it. But take that obligation seriously. If you say yes to a review, you are obliged to the community to complete it in a timely manner. And I put an exclamation point after this. Delayed reviews are our biggest challenge. Authors get grouchy. They say, I'm going to a different journal because you can't get your job done. And sometimes I have sympathy with them. Now, sometimes you have a life too, and you have other things to do. But if you find yourself in a position where you can't complete the journal review in a timely manner, ask the associate editor. Say, maybe I have to step down from this. Because most of the associate editors ask you for a reason. They want to hear your input, and they are often very forgiving in waiting for your input, because presumably if you've taken a look at it, and they don't want to go out and ask somebody new, which could put another 6-month delay on the process. So this is very important. It's our biggest challenge. Some of these features of a quality review are things that Jackie said. It's very nice to see a short summary paragraph to show you read the paper. I appreciate seeing following the summary, which is clinical. The summary doesn't have to make any judgments, just says what do the authors do. I prefer the next paragraph to have a definitive recommendation: decline, measure revision, minor revision, accept, and maybe a 1-sentence rationale, or it could be 2 sentences, but short, to the point, and definitive. I like the next part of the review to be maybe very similar to what Jackie said, a paragraph or 2 giving a big picture assessment. The authors did some new work here. It's novel, it's important. It's actually a little more important for mechanical engineering, but maybe there's an argument for aerospace engineering. Is it careful? Is the English acceptable? When I see some reviewers getting out their dictionaries and writing a tremendous markup of journals, and you're free to do that. It's not required. If you want to do that, you're free to do that, but it's really the author's responsibility. And if you don't think it's acceptable, a very useful thing to do is the English is not at the proper standard. For example, consider this sentence, it needs fixed, as do many others. You do not need to proofread the entire paper. Very important, is the literature review appropriate? Do they review the right papers? Be very careful how you say that. Make sure when you ask them to review a paper that there's a strong argument for the paper based on science, not getting somebody a bunch of citations, based on science, that the authors need to consider this topic that is really important and they haven't considered it. And you can ask them for that. Also, very important for the journal quality, are the figures of high quality? Some are extremely good, but I guess on the whole, a lot of them that I see are sloppy, and they don't have units, they don't have fonts right, they don't use subscripts and superscripts, they don't match things. It's hard to read, but you definitely can ask and expect high quality figures. Followed by that, I would typically like to see a detailed or short, it doesn't have to, whatever the paper justifies, specific comments. Lastly, if you are recommending to revise it, it's nice to give the authors and the editor a really short list of, if the authors do A, B, and C, I think it will be acceptable. Very definitive. And then everybody, the editor and the authors, know what will satisfy you. So that's, I would call, features of a good review. Another slide. I already said this, but if the English is bad, you do not need to do detailed proofreading. If you sense a scientific integrity issue, probably best to contact either the associate editor or the editor-in-chief and explain that to them, and they can work with you on that. Something I ask you to do as well, I try to do it in my editorial process, look for scientific reproducibility. Could you or others repeat the author's study? It shouldn't just be a technical report that said, we used ANSYS Fluent, here's our results. Well, there's 15,000 different options in ANSYS Fluent. They need to tell you what they did so that others could reproduce the results. That makes it reproducible science. In other disciplines, there's been some tremendous things in the popular press, especially the psychology literature, where people have reproduced experiments and found no way can they reproduce them. So look for that. It's important. Assess the AIAA policy on numerical and experimental accuracy. See if it's been adequately addressed. And if your review is going to be delayed, communicate with the associate editor, and he may make a decision. Okay, I'm going to get another referee. Oops, and is that the next? Is that the last one? I think that's my last slide. Okay, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. All right. Let's see, Natasha, if technology's working with us.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Fantastic.
All right.
So we'll get your slides up.
Yeah.
Will we?
And I apologize in advance to the audience. I am a government employee. They do not allow us to download and use Zoom on our computers. So I am using the web interface, which limits functionality.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see.
Karina, did you have the slides or? Oh, nope, you've got it. Okay, perfect.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, I will keep this short and sweet because our other presenters have done an incredible job about hitting most of the points I have on, what does it really mean to be a good reviewer? Proper thing, of course, is to look for references and citations. So this presentation is drawn primarily from an old journal club that they used to run out of MIT, where they had a reviewer guide, as well as the now officially published MIT Harvard Broad Research Institute Communications Guide. And I've got a link there in case people are interested in looking into more depth. So most of these points have been hit, so I don't want to belabor them. I'll only bring up a few things which may not have been mentioned previously. We'll talk a little bit about scoping your review as a new reviewer, knowing your audience and what the purpose of your review is, and we've talked a lot about that. A little bit of a review structure, and again, there's no required structure. This will echo things that other people have said. The one thing I might focus on is justifying your decision, which we haven't talked about as much. A little slide about developing feedback and a quick summary. So I think we saw a lot of this already in Ping's excellent presentation. You've got two audiences, the editors and the authors. Your editors really want to hear your critical feedback and whether any claims need to be adjusted. They also kind of need to know where your expertise is so that you can show, you've got a good grasp of where that significance of that paper is in your field. So when you write that summary, sometimes that associate editor is going to look and see, yes, this person's really focusing on this particular part of the problem. So that's really where their review will come from. Authors, obviously, they're interested in understanding what aspects of their logic aren't easily understood, what they need to do to improve their paper, and how to make it more convincing. So the purpose of the review, I think, was outlined very clearly. You do want to explain to the editors and authors any issues that you have identified with the science being reported, which may require an evaluation either of scientific integrity, which we mentioned later can be handled a little bit between you and an editor, as well as the quality of that theoretical work. And I think we talked a little bit about this previously, are the derivations and the proofs done correctly, or is the experimental, work done, in a thoroughly scientific manner, things like that. Also, they want to check whether or not the conclusions match the work that's gone before. And this is something we'll delve into a little bit more later. So you've got to be able to justify whatever conclusions you're making. And we talked a little bit about making sure that this is the right journal for the paper you're seeing. So if you've got an extremely detailed, paper on one, specific aspect of laminar boundary flow, and they're sending it to a very general, aerospace journal, this may not be the right home. And you want to talk to the editor-in-chief or the associate editor to let them know of this. So a lot of this we've talked about before. Reviews I often see laid out in the structure that people have talked about, where there's a summary where you talk about the contributions, you talk about major issues and minor issues. Something you don't often see is, are you justifying your decision with your review? And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's the one thing I haven't heard yet. Your summary helps to demonstrate you've read and understood the manuscript, and it shows off your critical thinking. You want to start off with a description of the paper's main points, several, sentences summarizing the important findings. What are the contributions? How is this pushing the field forward? And, highlighting the significance and impact. And then you conclude with what you think the manuscript is really doing well and what it's not doing well. And we've hit these points before, so I won't belabor them. This is the slide I'll spend a little bit of time on. You don't always see this included in a review, but sometimes it's nice to actually state your decision in the review. So after you've summarized what you think the accomplishments of the paper are, and this can go after the major issues and the minor issues, but somewhere in the paper, you do want to say, what is your decision? Do you think this paper should be accepted? Do you think this paper should be rejected? Do you think the revisions are major? And I say this in all fairness, because I have seen reviews cross my desk where they're the nicest review I've ever seen. And then the person clicks on a box, later on saying reject. And it's like, oh my goodness, there's a disconnect between the kind of the niceness of the review, the lack of clarification of why this paper isn't, meeting the standards of this journal, and this decision, which is just taken in a radial button, is not quite linked. So it's nice to include that in the review, or if you're not including the line itself saying, I believe this paper should be accepted with, major revisions, there should be a clear connection between what's in your review and what you decide. And there's, of course, the option to provide confidential comments to the editors. If there is a decision where you think there may be plagiarism involved, so the paper could be very nice, or maybe you think it's been written entirely by generative AI, and there's no particular means right now to navigate that wormhole, but you want to bring something like that up. there's a place you can do that, and that might also lead to a disconnect between the type of review you're giving, but perhaps a hard rejection that you're going to then put into your final decision. And also, you do want to make sure that you are commenting on the aspects of the paper that you are an expert in. So if there are parts that you're not sure about, you either want to make that clear to the editor, or you want to make that clear in the course of the review that you are not going to address deeply technical issues related to concepts that you are not perhaps the expert in. Major concerns, we talked about this a bit previously in the two expert presentations before. You're evaluating the paper for significance, novelty, industrial relevance, or other specific field criteria. Serious major concerns should either yield or reject or accept with major revisions. So if you have a lot of these major concerns and your final decision is accept, there may be questions that your editor will have for you. Major concerns we talked a little bit about, is the argument presented consistent? Is there sufficient theory or data to back it up? Or is there just a lack of development to justify the claims made? And a good thing, as was brought up, if you have a major concern, it's important to cite resolutions. What are the things that they can do, the authors, to make the paper better? What type of analysis would help convince someone of the conclusion they're making? Minor concerns, we talked about that. Those are issues that would improve the clarity of the message, but don't impact the logic of the argument. So grammatical or typographical errors, missing references, insufficient or extraneous detail. You can kind of snapshot this page and delve into it. If you've got major concerns or you're clearly going to reject the paper, there is probably no great necessity to go into a line-by-line analysis of typographical errors or grammatical errors. So I'm going through this a little bit quickly. I'll slow down a little bit again for this particular slide. When you're giving your comments, either in the major concerns or the minor concerns, or even when you're outlining how you came to your decision, please structure your comments clearly. You want to separate each concern out, organize them in the order that you came across them, directly reference where you found them in the paper, and keep your comments brief. We all have our inner Herman Melville, we want to write Moby Dick, but perhaps this is not the place for it. You want to be very concise, and you want these comments to be actionable if possible. Another thing that I do want to pause here that was perhaps not as mentioned, when you suggest revisions that go along, for instance, with a major concern, you want to think a little bit, what is going to be the effort to complete this revision? Are you going to have to run a whole new experiment on the Large Hadron Collider, which will take 10 years and be, of course, very expensive? Or alternatively, is the problem not they need more data or they need more theory? Do they really need to adjust their claims downwards to fit the extent of their evidence? And so that's something you want to consider very carefully. And that leads into the question of, if they adjusted their claims downward, would this still then be, a good paper for the journal? Is there a bite of knowledge here that is journal worthy? So that will play into your decision when you suggest things they could do to resolve major concerns. And as was mentioned, please make sure your feedback is unbiased, professional, polite, and diplomatic. A tall order, but something we should all strive for. So just to summarize up, again, was addressed in previous presentations. You want to make sure your review contains a brief summary of the manuscript and shows what the contributions of the paper and its impact are. You want to direct the editor on the path forward. So is this clearly based on your review and accept or reject, or maybe a major revision? You want to identify whether or not these major concerns can be addressed in a reasonable manner, and why these are major concerns. What makes them major in your mind? Because one person's major, maybe some person's very minor, sort of a small lemma that needs to be proved, in the privacy of their own home. You want to list, obviously, the minor concerns that you have if you're asking to accept the paper or accepting with minor revisions. You want to make those very clear so the authors know exactly what those minor concerns are, so they can get it squared away for that final acceptance. And explain how your arguments can be better defended through analysis or experimentation. So for instance, if you have a major concern, you do want to cite those resolutions and make sure those resolutions are reasonable within the manuscript scope. And so keep in mind, you're not writing a magnum opus here as a paper. It is a bite-sized contribution, and what is the right bite size for these authors? And with that, I'll just, quote out, stop with a quote, a thoughtful, well-presented evaluation of manuscript with tangible suggestions for improvement and recommendations supported by comments is the most valuable contribution you can make as a reviewer. And it's appreciated both by the authors and by the editors. And with that, I'll stop.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks to all three of you. I'm just gonna take over screen sharing here to show one quick thing as we move to our final part of the webinar here. Okay, so the next part is question and answer, but before I do that, someone from AIAA is going to put a link in the chat. This is a Survey Monkey that will allow you to express interest in becoming a reviewer. And so the idea here is to, I'll stop sharing so I can see everybody's faces. The link should be in the chat. In just a second, there we go. And so basically one of the initiatives that the Publications Committee is undertaking this year is to try to recruit more reviewers, but not just reviewers generally, reviewers who have been trained. So that Survey Monkey link is the link to sign up to express interest in becoming a reviewer. The process from here on out, the plan is for me to get in touch with folks and basically identify what the best path forward is for people in terms of which journal. The idea is to identify people as, having taken this training so that the associate editors know who's been trained or attended the webinar, and then who, and as such, may have a little bit more training and background knowledge on good reviewing as a result. So I just saw a few more people jump in, and so I put that Survey Monkey link in the thing there. So I'm going to start to answer. I think Joe and I can probably just wrap about this since we lost our other two panelists. I remember some of the and you can't see the Survey Monkey. Okay. Can I? Well, here's what I'm going to do, because the Survey Monkey link is actually not all that long, is I'm going to share screen so that everybody can see it. There we go. And in the meantime, I'm going to see, oh, maybe I can type an answer. There we go. Okay, Karina and I just had the same idea. Fantastic, we're on it. Okay, so the Survey Monkey link is now in the answers to some of those Q&A, which means that they will stay up for people if they join afterwards, which is great. Okay, cool. So there were a couple questions that maybe I'll quickly answer from the Q&A before technology failed us here. And then we can go to any more that folks have. So the first question I remember from before was about why this isn't a double-blind process. I think in the I don't want to call it the hard engineering, but the more experimental, I guess practical engineering, we tend to be a single blind community. I do publish in the engineering education literature, and that's double blind, which I think is kind of interesting. But historically, we haven't been single blind. There is no plan right now to go to a single or a double blind reviewer process. And so, I'm not entirely sure what the history of that is, but that has not historically been the culture in our community. Joe, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but We've never been a double blind. You're on mute, by the way.
It hasn't been in the community I'm in. I review for a lot of journals, and I almost always see the authors' names.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, like, you know, I'm an experimentalist. I have about 8 experiments, and then we publish a lot of papers on those experiments. I know what everybody's experiments look like in my community. So even if they tried to make it double blind, I'd know exactly who, at least whose group it was coming from, even if I didn't know the exact, you know, grad student who was working on the project. So I think the double blind thing only goes so far. 2 other things I'll answer, and then somebody just put a really excellent question in the Q&A that I'd like to get to before we close out here. The first is somebody asked, how do you deal with something that's just wrong? The example they gave is like 2 + 2 = 6. You know, you should call that out. You just don't need to be a jerk about it. And so, you know, I think experienced reviewers have all run into cases where they found something that's wrong. Sometimes it's actually wrong, and sometimes it's a typo. Either way, it's good to point out, because if it's a typo, it's easily fixable. If it's actually wrong, then, you know, you can go back and redo the analysis. But that you can absolutely call that out in a professional and constructive way. And it's very helpful. Joe, any follow-up on that?
Absolutely. If it's wrong, I say things like, it appears that equation 3 is in error. I compared it with Liebman and Roscow's equivalent equation, and they don't match. So unless the authors can explain this, they will need to fix it.
Yeah. The other question that sort of piqued my interest from the previous Q&A, and then we can jump in to the ones that are new. Somebody asked if editors are using AI tools to detect plagiarism. And I just wanted to say a couple things on that. There are standard tools that are used to detect plagiarism. The tool we use at AIAA, and a lot of people do, is called Authenticate. It gives you a cross-ref score. What it's basically doing is seeing if these words have been published in other papers that are available on the internet. And so I don't know if that counts as an AI tool, but it's a very commonly used you know, piece of software. I think it's the same thing as Turnitin. If
It is, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. So so yes, that is standardly happening at every single journal. It just, as part of the process, every paper goes through there, and both the editors-in-chief and the associate editors see that cross-reference score. And so if it's a high number, that's something that they check at the beginning.
Yes.
That says, like, you know, what's up with this? So Joe, what do you do when you see a high cross-ref score?
So if I see I look at it. Now, sometimes it's perfectly all right. Sometimes the authors took their AIAA conference paper and submitted it to the journal, or they took their dissertation and submitted it to the journal and cited their dissertation. We have no problems with that, but that'll give a high score on the plagiarism check. Other times, sometimes I'll see 20% overlap. Most of the time, that's okay, because the software is very diligent and it gets a lot of false positives. But when I see something in the 40s to the 50s, I start looking at the figures. I start looking, are they copying paragraphs? Are they doing the same problem? Oftentimes there's a problem when it's in the 40 to 50% range. But I look at every one of them individually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the associate editors are too. So one thing I will say about submitting an AIAA conference paper into a journal, we highly recommend it. AIAA is one of the only professional societies that encourages you to do it, so please do it. The only thing we'll say is that when you submit that paper, you need to indicate that it has been published previously. We're not going to count this against you, but there is a part. I just submitted a paper to AIAA journal, so I know exactly what this looks like. But there is a question that says, has this been published somewhere else? and it asks you to say, so I put in AIAA SciTech 2023, this was the paper number, right? And it's just a record of where it's been. This is an important ethical standard within AIAA publishing. We love to see people who have taken their conference papers and really spiffed them up and then submitted them to the journals. But you do need to indicate that there was, that the root of this paper came from an AIAA conference paper or something else, and what that was. So please just note that that is in there. Joe?
Yeah, there's a comment I wanted to put in my talk, but it's short. It's a new comment. I think a real problem that we have right now, and I ask as reviewers to look for it, is blah, unexciting conclusions. About half of the papers we get have a laundry list of, we did this, we did that, we did this twice, we did that, more study is needed. And that's a laundry list of what you did. It's not an interpretation of your results or comparing it to other people's results. It's not advancing the scientific knowledge. It's a thing you put in a technical report for an internal agency. And we don't get impact when we let that sort of thing go through in our conclusions.
Agreed. All right, so I'm going to jump now to the one other thing on AI. So this is something that AIAA is thinking about, AI in publishing. Keep your ear out for more forthcoming at the beginning of next year. Okay, so Joe.
We actually do use AI in another regard to suggest reviewers.
That's right.
So
Yes.
every associate editor gets a pretty good list, actually, not perfect, of suggested referees. And I found that very, very useful. And there's an AI code that's doing comparisons and picking out people who might, I think it's based on Web of Science, and it's pretty good. Yeah,
it's about 75% good. Some of them you're like, what? But most of them are helpful. So, all right, we're going to jump to the questions now. This first one, I remember from the earlier Q&A, and I'm going to throw it to Joe. So it says, what should I do if the abstract suggests that I'm familiar enough to review, but after reading the full paper, I find that the paper deals with something else that I am not really qualified to review? What should I do?
If you truly don't believe you're qualified to review it, you just write the associate editor and say, I'm not right. I can't make a competent review on this paper because and that's your judgment to make. That said, I would encourage you to be confident in yourself. Lots of times you can read the article and say, okay, and you write it in your review. I'm not expert on this. Nevertheless, I found this to be interesting. And you tell the editor that your comments are those of a informed non-expert, and give him the chance or her the chance to assess that, because we have struggles getting people to submit reviews. So if you tell us that you're not the best, but then say, this is what I thought, that is valuable data.
It is. Excellent. So to that end, there are two questions here that I really like. And Joe, I'd like to get your perspective on. The first is, what is the preferred level of training before a young professional could start contributing towards peer review?
Oh, I've never had that question before. Typically, I never ask that question to my referees because this is a rather new initiative. So when I'm associate editing and I pick referees, I just usually either know the community very well and pick some good people, or look in the literature and see who's publishing in the same area. And sometimes I go out and find people I don't know, but if they've got the right paper, and I don't ask them to get trained. There's not enough time to do that. So I don't think we have that fried into our system, and I don't think we should.
Yeah. So I think Joe makes a really good point, and this is one that came up in the next question. You should be publishing in that area. But the question is, to be a reviewer, should you have previously published in the journal in which you want to review? If yes, is there a minimum number of papers you should have published?
No. If you love JFM and you're talking about reacting shear layers in JFM, and JPP gets a reacting shear layer paper, I'll ask you to review it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the important thing is demonstrated competence in that area in the literature. In the high quality literature, right? And
Yeah.
so the examples that you gave are good, right? So if you're publishing in peer institution journals and ASMEI, IEEE, or others, that are well regarded, that's the track record I think that we're looking for. So let's see. So I had this came up previously, but what are some more examples of familiarity with an author? Is it sufficient to have graduated from the same university or having met in an event? That I wouldn't consider either of those conflicts of interest. I think, it's the closeness with somebody. So in the previous question, somebody seemed a little offended by one of the comments that I made about you should not be reviewing your PhD advisor's work. This is a pretty common conflict of interest. You are not allowed to review your PhD advisor's proposals for federal applications, at least in the United States. And I know this is a stated conflict of interest for a number of other publishers. Do we want to trust our reviewers? Yes. The other thing, though, is that there's a groupthink that I think that comes with coming from a group. There certainly is, the group that I graduated from, we have a philosophy. And when you want to review a paper, you want to get differing points of view, right? And so you can try and be as objective as humanly possible. And we would love to trust that our reviewers are all being great objective reviewers. But that differing sense of opinion is something that editors are definitely looking for. And so that's another reason why we try to avoid these conflicts of interest. Joe, what do you have to say?
I agree with you in general. There are some, I've violated your rule, and especially for combustion theory and modeling is a very small community. That's
very true.
And sometimes we're just stuck. I've been graduated for 34 years. And my advisor's still publishing, and the editor knows me. They know my advisor. They know, everybody knows that I was his student, and he knows that. He wants my review. I give it to him.
That's true. There is a distance that comes with this, right? Fresh out of grad school may be different than 20 years down the line. So I think this is a good question because we didn't really talk about this in the process, but how do editors choose reviewers? How do I make sure I am visible to the potential reviewer list for applicable topics? So I'm going to answer the second question vis-a-vis this training. And then Joe, I'm going to hand it to you for the first question. Sure. So again, we'll put the link in response to this question, but if you are interested in reviewing for AIAA journals, please fill out that SurveyMonkey, and I will be reaching out to folks. This is my initiative here, and the idea is to bring people into the fold now that they've gone through this webinar, and make you visible to the associate editors of the particular discipline that you're in, so that they know that you are an enthusiastic reviewer who is going to respond to the reviewer invitation within 48 hours. And so, which would make everybody's life a little bit easier. And so that's how it would work specifically for this program. But Joe, more generally, how do editors choose reviewers?
I'll tell you what I do. So when about 5 or 6 times a year, I get a query from a typically young scholar, and they says, I want to review for JPP. So I look at it, and 95% of the time, the guy is legitimate. And if he's a turkey, I say, thank you for your interest. But if he's not a turkey, I say, I see that he's got or she's got expertise in gas turbines. So I will forward that email, typically with the CV, to my associate editors who are in gas turbines, and I say, this gentleman or lady has volunteered to be an associate editor. Please keep him or her in mind when you're making your assignments. And I don't feel like I need to or should do any more, because associate editors make the call on who the referees are. I don't.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we have 1 minute left, and so I am trying to answer a couple last questions in the chat here. But I do want to be respectful of folks' time, including the wonderful folks at AIAA who set this up. So many thanks to them. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm you can find all my contact information at Penn State. If you have questions about the initiative, again, reach out to me. But always, our editors-in-chief are fantastic. And like Joe said, definitely looking for enthusiastic folks. So if you are interested, please fill out that SurveyMonkey link that you can find in several of the answered questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming and joining after our technical difficulties there. Hopefully we catch some people in the recording, and we will be in touch soon. So have a lovely rest of your day wherever you are in the world. And thanks again for attending. All right.